So thanks everyone for sort of joining us for the second week now whilst we're facing lockdown and travel restrictions in Cambodia. So we Realestate.com will be running weekly live streams, at least weekly, once a week during this time, to update everyone locally and internationally about some COVID updates, but we will we'll obviously leave most of that for the to the government to release information. You can access all the important information anyone locally or internationally needs to know from government resources, and then also media such as the Khmer Times, who are doing a really good job in distributing sort of really important information in English language and Khmer through their Telegram and online platform as well. So for us, we'll take more of a spin on the economy itself and of course the real estate market. Today, I want to introduce our guest, Mr. Anthony Galliano, who's the CEO of Cambodian Investment Management Holdings, which probably needs a little bit more explanation. And I've known Anthony for a long time. He's an advisor to Realestate.com.kh and our business operations, both here and in some other international markets. Knowing Anthony, I know that you're sort of in your professional career, you're across multiple industries, including real estate, investment, banking, finance, and more. Certainly through your network, at very least, you also have exposure to the public sector in ways, and a visibility across small and large enterprises. So I thought to give our audience like a really good perspective, probably at a high level, because we won't have time for everything, but to go into sort of more of the different industries outside of real estate, but also including real estate as well. I will kick things off by giving some high-level COVID updates, which we went through a little bit last week, but anyone that's joined the live stream for the first time, Cambodia coped really well with COVID through 2020. Case numbers were generally quite low, and more likely was sort of cases from overseas that were generally contained within sort of the hotel quarantine system. Is working very well. So some of you watching might say that sort of 11 cases is reasonably low, which it generally is, but we're sort of starting to see over the last, I guess, 2 weeks, correct me if I'm wrong, sort of the biggest outbreak Cambodia's seen. So as we touched on last week, sort of on the April 14th, Phnom Penh and Ta Khmer went into strict lockdown, which included a range of things like curfews, travel restrictions, and only allowing essential services to operate. Just recently, on the 26th of April, the lockdown measures for Phnom Penh and Ta Khmer and other parts of the country where COVID's sort of more present, that lockdown's been extended to the 5th of May. Since sort of the April 14th date, more provinces across the country have faced similar restrictions. However, just recently, provinces that are deemed to be safe by authorities have started to ease those restrictions. Applying for permits to allow that 20% of staff and sort of more essential services to operate has become easier via sort of government resources and government apps that have been launched very rapidly. And vaccinating is still rapidly being rolled out across the country. Over 1 million people have already had their first dose of the vaccine. Last week in the webinar, we touched on red zones. It was sort of just a thing, sort of this time last week, which are locations that are considered high risk, and therefore tighter restrictions are applied to those areas. And then just recently, in the last few days, the government has announced a 3-zone system categorized as red, orange, and yellow zones. Red being the most at high risk, yellow being the least, and orange in the middle. And each zone contains its varying levels of restrictions. It's sort of red being the most restrictions and yellow being the least. and that sort of starts to be a good segue into the interview, because that, combined with the Ministry of Tourism currently studying the possibility of allowing foreign tourists that are coming from safe countries and that are vaccinated, possibly they're looking at how to allow those types of tourists back into market areas like Siem Reap, which are sort of a safer zone than, say, Phnom Penh is right now. So when I spoke to Anthony last week, we were talking about how the market could coexist with COVID, and I think the zoning is part of that. But before we get into the interview, Anthony, I hope I did your introduction justice. But could you just tell the audience a little bit more about yourself and the businesses and the parts of the economy you sort of touch across your professional life?
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for the introduction. Have to apologize for the long hair. This is part of COVID.
Yeah.
There's no way to get a haircut, I guess, the last 3 or 4 weeks, so it's been a little difficult.
Yes. Great. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm very happy to be interviewed by Realestate.com.kh. And just briefly for me, those of you who don't know me, I've been here 13 years. I'm a banker by trade. I've worked for Citibank for 17 years and ANZ for about 3 or 4. ANZ brought me here as a corporate bank head for Cambodia. And about 10 or 12 years ago, I started my own business. We're in business services, a sort of A to Z. So we do pre-market entry. Then we also do company incorporations, company registrations, tax accounting, service offices, HR, pretty much any business services. We're an insurance agency, insurance brokerage, auditing, a bunch of businesses. So we get to touch really anything that a business needs to do, including corporate finance. And that's really sums up the group.
Perfect. Thanks, Anthony. So, getting into sort of the meat of the webinar today, I wanted to get your sort of perspective and thoughts on starting with the 4 pillars of the Cambodian economy, which are the garment sector, real estate and construction, agriculture, and the tourism industry, which have all been really the key drivers in the economy over the last for however long I can remember, and I've been here for 8 years. But we'll try and keep this at a high level. But starting with the garment sector, which I'm reading articles on a few platforms this morning, those that are in red zones, I believe those staff they have to stay at home and their salaries have been affected to 50%. So how has the garment sector been affected sort of since COVID first came in 2020 and certainly, at the moment that we're facing sort of the stricter lockdowns that we hadn't seen before?
Okay, well, let me start out and say that the textile industry is about 16% of GDP, so it's a very important part of the economy. It was doing generally okay, and I think that had to do with a lot from the U.S. The U.S. Imports were increasing year by year. U.S. is the largest country that imports from Cambodia, and with the recovery in the U.S. economy, that had really kept the stability for Cambodia in the garment industry. Unfortunately, we're now sort of 13 or 14 months into what would be categorized COVID economy, and it's very hard to sort of say that this is an unforeseen event, given that it couldn't be really force majeure, that COVID's been around for quite a while. The risk here is that because we've been recently hit with the February 20th incident, and there may be some slowdown in production, as Tom mentioned, in red zones, and perhaps those factories that have seen an outbreak in the factories themselves. There could be penalties for delivery orders that aren't delivered on time, or there could be now use a view that Cambodia is under a severe strain, some order diversion to other countries. This is a big risk, I think, that is more of a current risk than what has happened in the past with the industry itself. The industry has performed reasonably well during COVID. I think that has a lot to do with the U.S. Contributing to buying more bicycles and handbags and luxury. The U.S. economy is sort of back on track, and that's helped a lot. But the risk itself of what's happened on February 20th is yet to be seen, because the garment industry is a very transitory industry. There's a lot of players in it. It's really a low cost game for buyers. So if there's a sense that there will be a disruption in the supply chain, if there's a sense there'll be a disruption in production, there may be some diversion to other countries, which we'll start to see over the next 3 to 4 months.
A diversion to other countries in terms of the garment sector needing to target those countries as end consumers, or diverting them to
production. So you could see Bangladesh or India, China, even China, Vietnam, Indonesia, which are big garment producers.
Right. Okay.
So there'll be diversion of orders.
Right. We'll get into sort of some resolutions that you might forecast in each sector as well, but sort of later in the interview. But and then the agricultural industry. How have you seen the effects on the agricultural industry? Is it sort of similar to garments in that international markets are a real key driver, or?
It's a big part of the country's economy. It's about 22%, and it employs 1/3 of the country. So it's a pretty big part of the economy, primarily with rice and animal husbandry and vegetables. There's been an unfortunate trend towards consumption, because obviously there's a lot of small farming done, household farming, I would call. So there's been a little bit of a shift towards consumption rather than production. So there's some positive signs, but I think the agriculture industry was the one with the highest potential for many years in Cambodia, but that realization hasn't occurred. One of the problems with agriculture here is that it gets a very low percent of FDI, foreign direct investment. It's only about 1%. So there's been a lot of positive traction to develop the industry in terms of conceptually and the government promoting it, but it really hasn't moved much. It hasn't had a major effect. There's some of the good things that have happened recently is there's been a foreign trade agreement with China, and big part of that was to have more agricultural goods exported to China. We've seen some positive signs there. There was $470 million worth of mangoes being exported to China. So I think the momentum is to increase agricultural exports, to increase agricultural production. But in terms of COVID, it's been pretty neutral.
Yeah.
There's been very little positive or negative impact.
Yeah, that makes sense, because obviously there's a lot more space and lower density around sort of agricultural sort of production areas, you would say. So probably
75% of the population is still non-urban.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's moved a bit, over the last 3 or 4 years from 80%. But effectively, this is a country that's a very rural country, with 75% of the population outside of the cities, and a lot of that is self-farming, as you know. And that, as I said, the negative trend for that is more of a self-consumption of the agriculture rather than a production of the agriculture.
Yeah, it makes sense. So then, certainly an industry that's been probably one of the worst affected by COVID is, of course, hospitality and tourism. Some opportunities there for the delivery apps and the restaurants sort of still being able to deliver to home. But I mean, certainly the tourism part of the sector. I mean, some trends that I've seen in real estate is hotels converting to long term and sort of long term stays, and therefore that's increasing competition for apartment owners and condominium owners, service departments in what was already a pretty tough market for them. So more stock coming online. And certainly 2020 was sort of probably okay from a local tourism point of view, but certainly with these new restrictions in place, the hospitality and tourism sector is probably one of the worst affected. So what are your thoughts on this part of the market, Anthony? And there's obviously a lot of small operators in this part of the market in any country. So what are these people doing to survive, I guess?
I guess the best word to describe this is complete devastation. It has really been horrific what's happened to hospitality and tourism. There was some hope of a tail end of the year for that to change, but frankly, this is a really critical situation. So the first thing is to see why this is happening. It's happening, of course, because of COVID, but the issue here is travel restrictions. So there are some free travels in countries now opening up, and there was, for instance, US, Europe opened up a bit, but ASEAN has pretty much been closed down. We were getting some flights in from China, but that turned out pretty badly, I guess, for increasing the spread. So right now, it's just, if you look at the numbers, for 220, there was an 80% drop. So that includes 3 months of when we were open. So those numbers are horrifically worse now, in the high 90s% drop in tourist arrivals. So that the economy in 220, that's been a big effect. So the gross revenue for the tourist industry in total was only $1 billion in 220, and that, as I said, is an 80% decline from about 4.9 billion. And the sector's only contributed now from a sector that was about 20% of GDP. It was 20% of our economy. It's now 3% of our economy. And that's getting worse because, again, in 220, we had 3 months of a normalized flow of tourism where we don't have that this year. So I think the numbers, the math speaks for itself. If you're down 90-something% in arrivals, you could expect complete devastation in the industry. And that's what's effectively happened. The larger hotels are managing to be supported by head office and staying open without a problem, but the closures in hotels is horrific. With this horrible sort of scenario, I guess the question is, what is the light at the end of the tunnel? The light at the end of the tunnel is flickering and then going out and flickering and going out with every time there's a community spread. So I don't see short term, and the prognosis is generally from global industry statistics will be probably 223 with some sort of recovery. This year is expected to be a very horrible year. If anything opens, it would be bubble-ish sort of things at maybe the last quarter of the year. We're already well into the second quarter and approaching the third quarter already. There was some hope something would have happened in the second quarter, maybe something in the third quarter. This is seeming highly unlikely. And if there's any sort of break in this in the slightest way, it's likely in the fourth quarter. And then the recovery, you need tourists to come from Europe and from other Asian countries. And Europe's suffering horrifically as well with another wave of COVID. So there's nothing positive right now to say, except that we expect maybe by the fourth quarter, some sort of bubble-ish, maybe Vietnam, Thailand, cross-border travel at best.
Yeah, they were pre the recent lockdowns. They were, really looking at this bubble idea, certainly with, I think, parts of Thailand, you can certainly sense the motivation to open up the country or parts of the country, as quickly as possible, for this reason. I think, on a maybe a small business point of view, last year in this sector with hospitality, obviously there was less international tourists. Obviously, as you mentioned, in Siem Reap, and a lot of the sort of stars of the hospitality industry had thriving businesses in Siem Reap catering to those tourists who made a decision sort of one by one, and seemed to be a flow-on effect of those businesses moving to Phnom Penh to sort of leverage the expat market, affluent Khmer or middle-class Khmer market. And they probably enjoyed a month or two of okay times if they'd opened doors in time, and now they're sort of facing these lockdowns again. So really,
So our group is a little bit into the restaurant industry, so we have some experience here as well.
Yeah.
First, I could say that there's been substantial closing of restaurants itself. Before this recent spread, it's pretty much visibly, to any observer in Phnom Penh on the streets, that we've seen a lot of closures of restaurants, which has been unfortunate. February 20th is really the sort of the nail in the coffin for those that were sort of surviving. It is really unfortunate that we have this situation. I think the riverfront is, anybody that observes what's happening on the riverfront in terms of closures can see this. There's been a habitual change in how people decide to eat in terms of ordering outside, and it would be the delivery apps. So I think restaurants that are still in the game are adjusting by doing delivery more as a promotion of delivery rather than in restaurant eating. So that change has actually helped the restaurants quite a bit. They've been able to do that. I think Khmer's, to give them credit, I mean, the Khmer people, when there's a crisis like this, there was a lot of self-lockdown imposed, where they decided a lot of the population didn't want to go out to eat to begin with. So restaurants were pretty empty on that basis, where people didn't want to eat in restaurants just for safety reasons. So this is another sector that's going to take a very, very long time to reemerge, and that will probably, again, with yellow zones now and trending towards going to opening, even with opening, until things are improved in terms of the spread and containment. I don't see people going out again, because Khmers tend to be, again, self-locking down, self-curfewing, not wanting to go to restaurants. So that industry is going to suffer as well, probably for the remainder of the year. Yeah,
and I think through 2020 and now, I think the self-preservation that you are alluding to with the local Cambodians, needs to be commended in some respects too, because certainly, I'm from Australia, and the government came out in Victoria at least and said, masks are mandatory, and, they had a really tough time sort of making sure everyone wore a mask, whether I think through COVID in Cambodia, or probably all of Southeast Asia and much of Asia, it's a regular thing if you're sick or you have a bit of a cold, you wear a mask. So, it does need to be commended in some respects, that sort of, just maybe going a little bit off topic, with your exposure to the F&B industry and the food ordering apps. There's always, since I've been here for 8 years, you've always been, in a weird way, Cambodia was ahead of the curve compared to somewhere like Australia. When I first left Australia, Uber Eats just became a thing. Whether when I got to Cambodia, it was very much a thing, but it was really a Western or an expat used thing. Do you think there's been more adoption, obviously, with this COVID in place, fast adoption from the Khmer market, ordering to home?
Absolutely. Yes. Again, I think a lot of it has to do with very, very cautious culture here, and very sort of abiding to what the government's recommendations were, which is great because that helped us, definitely helped us for most of the cycle of what's happening with the spread. So there's been a massive adoption. The recent issues with the lockdown have been more of a logistics issues. When the lockdown first occurred, there was a lot of confusion the first few days of how to get around. There was a lot of difficulty initially, and not so much now, to get employees into the restaurants to do the cooking and to do the preparation and so forth. So initially, the Sankots, I believe, were only allowing a small percentage of employees to come in. But now that the employees are back, the restaurants are operating, the food apps are traveling pretty freely, I would say, except the red zones are still a little difficulty when you're ordering. But it's been a massive adoption of the food apps. I gotta be honest myself, I wasn't a big user of it. I like to go out and have a meal in a restaurant, but I've been doing it myself as it has my family. So it's becoming a norm for us.
Yeah. Certainly for me as well. Similar, and love to go out to a restaurant, but certainly ordering a lot online at the moment. I think every time through 2020 and we started up the live streams again last week. Every time you do a live stream that's related to COVID and COVID restrictions, I know we're going to get this question when we start sort of answering some of the viewers' questions. So, what does your crystal ball tell you? Right now, in terms of how long do you feel like this lockdown's going to last?
This is probably the most unpredictable event that one can even make a forecast for. And I think there's just altering government plans around that. For me, the silver bullet is the vaccinations. And the vaccination rollout initially was very expeditious, in credit to the Ministry of Health. The lockdown has slowed it a bit. There was, I believe, only 2,000 vaccinations yesterday from what I'm hearing. So if the country can really accelerate the vaccinations, it's very much like what's happened in the U.S. I think to give Joe Biden credibility for when he took office, he immediately focused on vaccinations, and the U.S. economy has really just opened up on that basis. Going from the worst story in the world in terms of people dying to no plan to probably now the best story in the world. And I think there's also some criticism there of hoarding vaccinations as well, which is another story. But they've really shown what vaccinating the population can do. It's just opened up the economy. And that's what I really hope Cambodia does. Now there's variants. There's some discussion about whether the variants the vaccines will be effective against those. I think the majority of it is just getting the vaccine, and you're pretty much going to cover a large part of the population. So I actually am optimistic because I believe truly that the government here has a plan, and they actually are quite good in execution in those plans. It's not a disorganized, chaotic situation. They're ordering the vaccines. There's a lot of support from the business community to give the Oknias credit and to give even the foreign businesses credit. There's been a lot of donations there. There's big support and commitment from the population. So I believe we'll see pretty high vaccination rate within the next couple of months. And I believe the economy will start rebounding in the fourth quarter. So my prognosis, if I'm being asked this question, would be I believe the fourth quarter will start to see acceleration in growth. Now, I don't think the tourist industry is going to be any way really contribute to that. I believe construction will come back. China is another silver bullet, by the way, to me. China's FDI is increasing exponentially. They're about 50-something% of FDI now, and I believe they'll resume their plans in terms of infrastructure and construction, and that's really going to help. So fourth quarter looks very positive to me. I think there'll be some up and downs, some bumps, and then things will sort of sort themselves out. But the positive side about this is the government here is actually very well organized. The vaccinations are arriving. There's a schedule of flights coming in with different types of vaccinations. And the Ministry of Health has a very clear plan for vaccinations. It will take a few months to get there. It's not that easy, but from what I've seen, I think a lot of us have seen with our staffs in our businesses. Surprisingly, all of a sudden, the last month and a half, everybody seems to be getting vaccinated quite quickly. So let's be positive. Again, vaccinations, China, those seem to me to be the two sort of catalysts that will get us to the fourth quarter. With undoubtedly, again, tourism and hospitality are going to be suffering. There's no doubt about it. But the other three industries should be okay.
Yeah,
should do quite well.
Well, it's probably one of the best answers we've got on that question, which is, I get asked it myself. It's almost the impossible question to answer accurately. So it gives it's a really well-rounded answer, and sort of, gives me personally and sort of, I'm sure everyone watching a realistic outlook on things.
I'm not trying to say America's, a great example of, but in this case, I have to say it sort of shows how you can be in a really terrible situation. I mean, almost 575,000 deaths under the last administration with no plan for vaccination. And it could show you just like the dramatic turnaround that could happen when the vaccination process is organized and you start vaccinating the population. So the deaths that were 3,000 or 4,000 a day, whatever they were, I mean, it's still high with, I think, about 1,000 a day. I mean, as a sort of a leftover, I think, effect. But the economies have all opened up, and we can't get enough people to work. There's just there's such a demand for employment. The economy is recovering. The stock market's zooming through the roof, and it shows that when you have a plan in place with vaccinations, you could be pretty positive and confident that you'll see a recovery in your economy. Yeah.
Well, I think what you mentioned, and pre the lockdown, I do think it was an extremely well organized and well implemented vaccination program. I guess having to make the decision to go into lockdown, they obviously need time to reorganize that program. But I know a personal friend that got their second vaccination today, so I think from my perspective, I think we'll see the vaccination program start to ramp back up. And I think you're right in terms of that being the silver bullet in many ways. And obviously China is your second silver bullet in terms of FDI. And then if the vaccination program sort of really rolls out to most of the country, then then hopefully we will see the government sector sort of ramp back up with demand from the US if we can sort of have the factories operating and we can get the exports to that market. So I sort of, my next question was in relation to flattening the curve, but obviously your answer is going to be the vaccination. But I guess, do you think, the vaccination and this concept of zoning, how much this concept of zoning, which I'm all in, I think that's a great idea. I've seen zoning work very well in Sydney, Australia, and it was strict lockdown of all of Victoria or at least inner Victoria, which is where I'm from. And I think New South Wales, Sydney, Australia did the zoning concept or a version thereof very well. So do you think that can sort of help the economy marginally whilst we're trying to vaccinate, most of the population?
I personally have a little mixed views on zoning and lockdowns. They're sort of start and go. And I mean, if I could give you a silly example as an accountant, you could do thousands of entries, and if you have one wrong entry, everything is screwed up. And I think what happens with lockdowns and curfews is it just takes one person to go to the wrong place And then they could, as we saw with the February 20th spread, it just took a few people to go out of line and to do things that weren't allowed, and it spread like crazy. So it's a devastating economic effect. There's no doubt about it. They are extraordinarily helpful if most of the population comply, and that's sort of hopefully been the case now. But I think the damage has been sort of done. And these zoning is going to be very helpful in containing the areas. However, I do believe that if there's an expectation that this is going to be the final solution, it's probably not. Lockdowns have had mixed success, primarily because of people's misbehavior, to be honest. And that could happen at any time. People that are infected could go from red zones to yellow zones to areas that aren't locked down at all, and it can start all over again.
Right. I was hoping you'd have a better outlook on the zoning. I also think, like I compare.
Don't interrupt. Don't get me wrong. It's necessary. It's the right thing to do. But I'm just being realistic that it's not going to be an absolute concrete foolproof solution, because it does, as we see, had the success we've had for over a year with no problems. It just took a few people to do the wrong thing.
No, I think you're exactly right. I think I'm just looking for all the positives you have to say. I do think it's the right thing to do, and I do think your outlook on it, is correct. It does take sort of one person, right? I mean, I guess we've tried. I've left all the real estate and construction to last, because that's what Realestate.com.kh is primarily in the real estate industry. And most of the viewers are too. So I thought I'd leave all that to the end as a bit of a major focus. So, and you, of course, are now a partner in a new venture, D&G. I know that this is pretty new, but how are the team going about operating in this time, and sort of what tools are you leveraging today to stay connected and to each other and to clients and potential clients?
Okay. Well, thank you for that. It gets me to promote my new venture a little bit with some really fantastic partners. So just to give you an idea who the team is, Dan Davies, formerly CBRE, and actually formerly Colliers as well in Myanmar. And Giovanni Antonio, who was a leading real estate person in the U.S. in the what we call the West Coast, Los Angeles area, has the three of us have joined together and formed a company called D&G, which is Dan, Anthony, and did I get it right? Oh, sorry, it's Davies, Antonio, and Galliano. I got it right. So the focus is really to be holistic. It's going to be on property management, investment consulting, on real estate projects, renegotiating leases, you name it. Any sort of product range in the real estate arena is what we'll be doing. These guys are much more experienced and seasoned than I am for many years in the real estate industry, well-known brands on their own. So we expect to be starting with pretty quick traction already, and to be a big player in the real estate industry. We wouldn't go into anything unless we thought we would be big in it.
Yeah.
So for me, I guess being on this call shows that I have long-term confidence, medium-term confidence in the real estate industry, and I expect to see quite a robust market in real estate for the medium and longer term. And I expect us to be a big player in that market in all the sort of product sectors.
Yep. I've got a question or two later to ask you about that. I know your confidence in the real estate industry, based on some decisions you've made in the last, recent 18 months, I would say, to show that you're clearly confident in the real estate market. We are too. You alluded to before in terms of the urbanization rate into major cities here, and I'm always asked the question about who's going to live in these apartments and things like that. But I think those people, they don't take into consideration that, there's just a sheer need for a lot more houses in the market, driven by locals that will live in a lot of these houses, let alone having to rely on sort of expats staying in apartments and things like that. So, but last year, many, including myself, and, some of the most professionals, developers and agents, were all sort of thinking and expecting at least, rental prices, land prices, and houses, and, the general price of real estate to come down. And certainly we've seen, rentals correct or come down a little bit. Obviously, retail has been severely affected. Lots of companies have been downsizing in terms of office space, but we didn't see sort of the land prices come down across Phnom Penh or across Cambodia, really. So do you think the recent events will trigger that more, or do you think the Cambodia real estate industry, all in all, is so strong that it'll really hold its value and price?
Well, when I got your pre-questions, I guess, on some of the interviews we've done in the past, we talked about before COVID, I guess I thought prices were going to drop in terms of property prices.
Yeah.
Which I believe in this sense I was correct, that property prices just in general dropped. I think you have to separate something between what we call property prices and land prices, although I know land is property. When we talk about property, I think we're talking about housing, office, malls, condominiums, and that's generally just the property outlook in the country. Mm-hmm. Land prices in this country are extraordinarily resilient and are usually on the uptrend in all respects. I've been dabbling a little bit myself in sort of buying some land, and have held some land over the past 10 years. And actually, we both know people that have held land certainly as well. Land prices are just generally always up. I haven't met anybody that said I bought land and have lost money on land. So I think that is a separate category. Unfortunately, not readily available to foreigners, because the foreigners can't own land still in the country. But we have proxies, or we have wives, or we have family that's able to do that. So land prices have been resilient and very strong, and continue to be strong. Condo prices, housing prices, prices for industrial, commercial have been pretty weak. So I'd like to separate those two in a sense that land prices are a complete sector on their own.
Yeah. So then let's focus on the condo market for a little bit then, because yes, through Realestate.com.kh data and the sales that we are exposed to, there's certainly less sales, and prices have come down from new stock coming onto the market. I'm not considering resale properties, but I would say all in all, they haven't come down as much as I would have expected through last year. But I have seen, a lot of these developers pre-2020 were probably 70% focused on the international investor market. And through 2020, they had to shift their focus to the local buyer market. But some of the trends I saw from a lot of the developers, which I commend, was their ability to shift fast to the local market and understand the local market and what they look for when they're buying a property, which is very different to an international investor. So whilst to the naked eye, you might say, okay, the price has come down, but some of the trends I saw were, for example, a developer says, well, an international investor that may never step foot into Cambodia or may only want to come here for a holiday and visit their unit. Yes, they need fixtures, furnishings, and for a bit of safety, they would like a GRR scheme, for example, right? Which is really separate to a Cambodian buyer, which is probably a young generation Cambodian, that plans to live in the units, so it doesn't need the fixture and furnishings, so that brings the price down. Doesn't require the GRR scheme because they're going to live in it anyway, so that also brings the price down. So whilst, yes, yeah, we've seen better priced units, but they're also not getting as much built into that purchase. What's your view on the new development market and all the units coming online in the next sort of, recent future, short-term future and long-term future?
Yeah, I thank you for that. I want to give a little bit of my context of numbers, and then I'll go from there. So as I understand it, transaction volume's down about 15 to 20%. So
yeah.
The market volume has decreased in the condo market, and prices are down 20 to 30% range, with some fire sale prices even higher, in terms of lower, going down to 40, 50%. So there is a little bit at the short term, which it probably is the worst we'll see of COVID right now. There is a short-term depression or recession in the market. That also has to do with what you said a bit earlier, is that 60% of the market in terms of the condo market is foreigners. So if you have travel restrictions, it's very difficult for somebody who's making a major purchase not being able to see it, which is generally what people want to do rather than just buying it remotely. So that at the moment has led to, I think, certainly a recession in the market. We're probably the last of next month going to be in the worst of what we'll have in terms of COVID. So this moment in time is not the best moment in time to judge what the market will do in the future, because this is the worst probably it's going to get.
Yeah.
Cambodia is in a very early stage in its real estate market. It's an early cycle part of it. And I think having my 10 or 20 years in Asia, that you'll see, if you look at the skylines of Bangkok and Jakarta and Manila, how these markets, these countries started out with very little development in terms of that. Their real estate markets have just exploded, and how the demand sort of self-fulfills itself. So I strongly believe that while this market currently is very bad off and it's not in a great state, probably a good buying opportunity, to be frank, that we'll be looking at a revival and a resurgence in middle next year at least. I think the plan is certainly for open borders in terms of immigration from China. We should see a lot of Chinese investment. I think a lot of Chinese people will obviously want to come to live here. So I'm very confident that what's occurring now, when we look at it 6 to 8 months out from now, it's going to be a different story. I do expect a resurgence in the market next year.
Yeah, in terms of a local investor or buyer and an international investor, you alluded to it, but yeah, it probably is a great time to buy if they can afford it, because especially if you're buying a new development that's not going to be completed for 3 years anyway, you'd safely expect that we're past COVID by then, and you're buying at a great price today.
I mean, going to the local market, affordable housing is really where the positive news is. So the affordable housing is still a pretty robust market. Apartments and housing anywhere from $25,000. I mean, you could get certainly a house for $25,000 for some of these affordable housing projects, to apartments in the $40,000-$60,000 range, which again is a very affordable for Khmer. We got to remember that as much as the country has progressed and developed, the sort of growth, the per capita still here is $1,000 per person. So a month. So this is still we're still a low middle income country, and that will correlate to some extent for the local market with what they'll purchase in terms of real estate. The foreign market's a different story. People, the 60% that buy condos, are going to usually be the wealthy folks that want to have some property investment in a country. So the rental market needs to be robust for them as well, because a lot of those folks aren't going to be here and they want to see a return. So these GRRs that you speak about are very important. Those are the more attractive investments for foreigners. That's 60% that buy into the market that are looking to do a property investment with a return, capital gains return and an income return. But for Khmers, yes, the $25,000 to $60,000 range is a perfect space for them.
Yeah. And I mean, I know it's not much, but I think I'm not going to call it a silver lining, but having condo developers having to shift their focus to the local market, I think long term for those buildings when they're finished, ultimately it's a good thing because you have a healthy mix of international owners that are, living abroad and renting units out, and a healthy tenant mix at the end of the day with sort of more local Cambodians living in those buildings. So, I think that's sort of one positive to come out of it, because previous to 2020, Cambodians were really buying landed properties, some buying a condo or two, but nothing much. And now I think that COVID's really, through 2020, really spurred the local market. I'm not saying they're 100% focused on buying condos, but there's definitely more local buyers buying condos than there was sort of in 2019.
You look at some of the positive trends, Tom, and urbanization is a positive trend for the local market. We've at least, I think, over the last 5 years went from 80% in the countryside now to 75%. So that's a pretty big change of 5% of people moving to cities. And as that continues, you'll be seeing much more property ownership of those that were originally in the cities now, in the countryside moving to the cities. They're going to need places to live. They'll make investments in local property. In terms of post-COVID, Cambodia is an attractive market for foreign investment. There's no doubt about that. It's a new market. It's a frontier market. You'll see a lot of inflows again, and particularly again from China, I believe. But Chinese money will be hot here next year for sure. Well, the trends there for next year are very positive. You just have to, as property is a cycle, you just have to bear with what we're dealing with now. And yes, as this year comes, everybody wanted to leave 2020 behind, but I think we're going to have to say to leave 2020 and 2021 behind before we start seeing some normalcy back to what we had before in Cambodia.
I'm holding on to the fourth quarter, Anthony. But you just mentioned fire sale, so it's probably my chance to plug something for Realestate.com.kh. Last year we did the first ever online property sale expo in June, which worked really, really well. We ran the event for 4 hours only. What we did was collect from developers sort of the best deals in the market, and from our agent partners the best deals in the resale market, whether it was landed property or condos, and really looking for those best deals to present them to the local market and international market at a time that's it's tough time, COVID globally and obviously locally, but also an opportunity for for investors that are looking to get into the market at a good price. So we're running that event again. We're launching sort of soft launch from the 6th of May. And then the discounts on all the properties will go live on the 3rd of June for 4 days this time. To be honest, we got really good deals from developers and agents in 2020 in June. But to be honest, we're expecting to be easily able to get a lot of these resale properties that we were expecting sort of 40, 50% sort of discounts on these properties, because we felt like there should be sort of the desperate sellers in the market. So do you think, I guess, what do you give my chances this time? Do you think I'm going to find it easier to get sort of under market value properties onto this event? And I think the question really is, do you think there'll be more distressed sellers as a result of the recent COVID sort of lockdowns and situation in Cambodia?
I think for your hopes of having unfortunate distressed sellers, I
No,
think
look, I honestly, with all respect, I didn't frame it properly. It is a sensitive event to be doing at this time. But at the same time, it is a vehicle for people that need to sell, to be able to sell in what is otherwise a difficult time, because they can sell online and transact online via this event. Whilst on the other side, it does provide an opportunity to people that are looking to get in the market at a good price. So yes, I probably wasn't sensitive enough talking about it and marketing it, because it's a tough time for many and an opportunity for others. Do you think we'll start to see more of these types of properties on the market in the coming months?
selectively, Tom, to be honest, I think one of the things I look at is the unemployment rate, which should give an indication if people are who are employed and get more as sort of the middle class and upper class sectors. And I haven't seen a real drop in employment. I think businesses that are employing those that would have home ownership, if I could put it in a really simple frame, those people continue to work, and those people continue to get paid. So I think from local persons, from the employment rate, I don't see a real distressed employment market yet. The opportunity may be in more of the foreign owners that are not seeing a return, that don't have the GIRR scheme, that are sort of saying, there's the concept, of course, that inventory costs money. Holding on to something costs money when you're not getting any return on it. And I think that's probably a problem that foreign investors that invest in multiple property markets are seeing anyway. But I would say there's more of an opportunity on that area where the foreigners that own condos here may want to get rid of them and are willing to take a hit rather than continuing to hold something that's not giving them a return. Holding a condominium, paying maintenance fees without getting rent is a horrible thing to sort of have, especially when the market is going south and not going upwards. So more on the opportunity, I think, in that area than the local commise. Because I haven't seen the economy contracted only 3.5% last year. It's expected probably to contract about the same this year. So the economy is not falling on its knees. We don't have a terrible situation with unemployment. Those that have pretty much been affected, being garments and I would say hotel and tourism, are not really in the high concentration of property ownership. So you may not get a lot of that in the local market, but more in the foreigners.
Mm. What did I want to do now? If I want to get to some of the questions that are being asked. I've got a few more questions myself for you around real estate. What are some of the risks you see in the market outside of COVID? Obviously, we've talked about a lot of positives, but I've also want to stop sharing my screen so I can get to the questions. And I hope I don't lose you whilst I'm sort of trying to access the question. So maybe we'll go with that question whilst I'm just going to sort of start to bring up the guest questions or the viewers' questions. So outside of COVID, all in all, I think we're both agreeing that, the Cambodian property market's got, and Cambodia in general's got so much growth left in it. In terms of infrastructure development, urbanization rates, and these types of things. But what are some of the other risks outside of COVID for the economy in Cambodia and then the real estate market?
I actually, to be frank, I'm very positive about the economy, very positive. I think the economy is going to have a lot of legs. I believe that it's been very well managed in terms of the containment, even though we're seeing this last February 20th event giving us some disparaging news and making us feel probably less confident. But I would say I think the economy, I have said this in a lot of articles that I've been quoted in, that I expect a massive resurgence in Cambodia, that it will actually emerge much better than other countries because of the government's handling of COVID here. I believe Sihanoukville is going to be a very big part of that as well. The the development of Scenic-ville as a gambling hub in Asia is probably the second gambling hub in Asia after Macau, is going to be very positive when the Chinese money when Chinese money comes back to finish what they started, and Scenic-ville opens up again. That's going to be a very big positive for Cambodia. The tourist developments eventually on the coasts are going to be again reemerge as being a very important part. I think we'll see a much less reliance on garments as part of the economy, for sure. In terms of the service sector, that we're developing our capital markets, insurance, and banking are continue to grow. I see fund management, capital markets being focus on that being increased as well, which will help with equity investments in the country, will help the country grow. So to me, there's very little risk in Cambodia. It's very just important that you look at sovereign risk, you look at the government. As long as the government stays intact and the policies continue, there's no reason to believe that that's not the case. We have a very fantastic management by the government so far, and I hope that continues. So I see very little risk, and there wasn't really much risk before COVID. I mean, the economy was growing at 7% a year, so it was really hard to identify. To me, if China is a very big key, very big important part of this. The only risk it was, of course, whether the Chinese economy would fall apart, and it hasn't. It's been a superstar. So as long as the Chinese economy keeps chugging along and China sees Cambodia as one of the more attractive places to invest, that's really a very important part of our recovery.
As we've gone through the live stream, a lot of the questions we've sort of answered along the way. But sort of one here, outside of a reliance in a way on China, I think we're speaking about like what other countries are important to Cambodia, and what are the other countries in terms of FDI into Cambodia?
It's going to have to be a very transparent answer. I mean, China is 50% plus of FDI. There's no doubt about it. So the reliance is there. It's absolutely there. I don't see any policy changes by the government to diversify that more. In fact, the FTA that was just signed with China only is going to increase trade with China. So the U.S. is very critical in terms of exports. Mm-hmm. The U.S. Is the largest exporting country, and that relationship is very important to Cambodia in terms of the garment industry. But when you look at in terms of other countries that are investing, it's really there's nothing that strikes me as to be besides China to be anything significant. Maybe Japan to some extent in the UK, but Japan can play an important part if they increase their investment.
Yeah,
but it's China, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Hopefully that will be diversified more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Japan is Japan's an interesting one. Certainly, there's multiple Japanese developers, and I know there's a lot of international, Japanese buyers in the condo market. There's always been a strong sort of, in recent years, strong Korean presence here in Cambodia, as well as sort of the more longer existing France and European markets. So, hopefully those sort of markets can we can continue to attract those markets. Obviously not going to rival China, but that would make for a healthy mix of FDI from not only China, but a mix of other countries as well.
And to give credit to the government, they've been signing a lot of trade agreements, which has been positive with a lot of countries.
Yeah,
and the tax department as well doing the DTAAs, to help as well. I guess there's been a lot of calls from the ADB and the World Bank and several institutions to diversify that FDI, and I hope that we can. But right now, again, it's primarily China.
Yeah. And there's another question around infrastructure. 2020, a lot of governments across the world, and including Cambodia, saw it also as an opportunity to really get in and get their hands dirty on a lot of infrastructure development in terms of new roads all around Sihanoukville. We're seeing the same in Siem Reap and to some extent in Phnom Penh, although the roads were pretty good around the capital city, Phnom Penh. What other infrastructure developments are in the pipeline that you know of course? Maybe you could start with the new airport.
A little untimely now, isn't it?
Yeah, probably. No, yeah, yes. But, it's obviously a major infrastructure project. But also I want to get to, potential train lines and things like that. If people watching internationally that may never have visited Cambodia, and we're talking about all this growth in a market that still doesn't have a train line or a Skyrail or anything like that, which will come one day. So yeah, your thoughts on infrastructure and.
Well, I mean, as an example, I was probably a long-term resident of Jakarta for some time, and Jakarta didn't have a train line, which is probably one of the countries that needed it the most until recently. Yeah. So I think Asian countries, with the exception of Hong Kong and Singapore, I would say, and China for sure, have been slow to catch up with what the population needs in terms of having a transportation infrastructure, an urban transportation infrastructure to what was actually needed. I mean, even in Thailand, with the development of the SkyTrain and the underground that they have, you still have pretty bad traffic situation. So we'll definitely, I think pre-COVID we were seeing it already. Traffic was getting terrible in Phnom Penh, and we definitely already are in need of some sort of mass transit infrastructure. The government, as far as I know, and from without exposing too much, I think they definitely are looking at this. It's been in the newspapers, I think, as well, in the media, that they're evaluating options. But I think we're going to need a little help because the government has beginning to borrow quite a bit in this crisis. We have quite a bit of foreign debt. Most of it to China, and that's on the increase. It's now over 30% of GDP. It was under 30% before this happened. So transportation infrastructures cost a lot of money, billions of dollars. So the structures are there for build and then to eventually hand it over, and they operate it for a period of time. But these are very complicated and complex deals, and I expect something will happen in terms of in terms of a mass transit system. It's always difficult to select whether you have a SkyTrain, an underground, or some other form of doing it. And they do take years and years to build. So it's in the pipeline. It's definitely being evaluated by the government, for sure. But there's no certainty around a decision yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And any other sort of major infrastructure projects that that you could tell us about, or that you think the market or the country needs?
I think there's focus on economic zones, which is good. This is just a continued development of getting foreign investment into the country. So there's developments on economic zones in the south. In terms of the Sihanoukville Highway, that's I think going to be near completion soon, and that's a very big positive step. The airports as well. Although I think that's going to be more helpful in 2023 than it is going to be in the short term.
Sure. Yeah.
The sports village is very big investment. You could probably tell your audience a little bit more about the sports village, but that's a very important development as well.
So that project's a really important project for the country as a whole, and Cambodia as a market. There's obviously commercial aspects to it, but the project, which is located in Troy Changbar, which is a really sort of fast booming location, and they're building the sport village and the Olympic facilities or the sport facilities for the Southeast Asia Games. and yeah, we're quite close to that project. But yeah, it's going to be a fantastic attraction and fantastic facilities for local Cambodians post the Southeast Asia Games. The project itself, includes international shopping malls and natural parks and running tracks around around what will initially be the athletes' village. And then those units are for sale now, both landed properties and apartments for sale, which they've launched during COVID and have done quite well so far in sales. They've only recently sort of launched marketing, but the project as a whole is super important for the country, because when a market or a country in Southeast Asia is hosting their Southeast Asia Games, it's really a chance to promote the country as a whole, and to Southeast Asia, but to the world as well. And obviously that attracts a lot of international tourism, which, and I think the developer themselves are paying a lot of respects to that it's really a national project. I'm talking about the developer that's building the athletes sort of village that are selling the units, and sort of really integrating into what sort of has the condominium towers, the landed properties, shop houses, villas, and so on. That's all encompassing with the new Olympic stadium and swimming pool and the other sport facilities they'll have to build for the games. But the project will really continue to elevate Troy Chang Ba, which even before this was sort of I live over there, and it's my favorite area in Phnom Penh. Next door to the project is one of the city's best golf courses, and lots of other tourist attractions over there as well. So yes, that is a major infrastructure development that we all look forward to completing. And I mean, the stadium itself, I'm not going to say a percent because I don't want to get it wrong, but I drive past it most days, and it's it's well on its way to completion. So then just probably got time for two more questions. Should the GDT delay its 2022 CGT plans again? If not, what impact would this have on planned Q4 upswing?
Whoa. I love to talk about the tax department. From my point of view, from very clear, they shouldn't have delayed it at all this year. The government's seen a drop in tax collection, and the government really needs the money now. The government's doing a lot of fiscal measures to support the economy, spending a lot of money to give those that are in need, aid. So with the drop in tax collection, this is an area, actually, I've said many times, shouldn't have gone unnoticed. Should have been done a long time ago. There's no reason why we shouldn't tax capital gains on property. There's no reason why we should have delayed this. I know property owners don't like to hear this, but it's as much as an employee doesn't like to hear that they have to pay their monthly tax on their salary. And this is a very simple, basic tax that's applied around the world. Now, I think, without telling the GDT what to do, I should first say it was very generous, by the way it was applied anyway. But even though it's delayed, but the way they're applying the tax is and I'm going to give a great example of this. So you could have bought a property 20 years ago and paid $10,000. It's worth $1 million now. But you could have a cost base of $800,000 you're allowed to apply 80% of the sale value as your cost. So you sort of, that application gives a lot of room for saving money anyway, that you made a ton of money and you're only paying a little bit of tax. So you're paying 20% on the profit that you made. So in that case, if you spend $10,000, it's worth $1 million. Your gain is $200,000. You pay $40,000, and you keep $950,000 gain. And I think that I think is not unusual for a lot of property owners that had property in the past that have gone back years and years and bought land in Siem Reap or have land in the provinces, and they've made a ton of money on it. So I'm a big advocate of implementing this tax. And I understand there was a lot of pressure to delay it, that it thought it would have a negative effect on the real estate market. It thought it would have a negative effect on the economy. But the government needs money. The government absolutely needs money. And this is not a hardship tax in any way. Let's be clear, it's not a hardship tax. This is a tax of people that are making money. They're making money. First of all, that's the most important thing to understand. If you sell your land and you lose money, you don't pay tax. It's only for those that are making money. And then there's a generous application of, you could choose a method where you could really lower your tax. It could have been refined a bit more. There could be short-term capital gains or long-term capital gains, or you go from a base that it has to be a property over a certain amount of money, so it only applies to properties over, let's say, 500,000 or something. It could have been thought about a little bit more to possibly affect more of those that are wealthy rather than those that are not as wealthy. But for me, absolutely should have been done already, and should be done as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's necessarily going to affect, long-term property investment from international buyers or local investors, local homeowners, and it's common in most markets to have this type of tax. I think those that got in but before it was implemented, and it was. Congratulations. But I mean, I don't think it's going to change someone's decision-making processes to, whether they should invest in Cambodia or not. Certainly not.
And as I said, it could be thought out a little bit more. A lot of markets, for instance, say if this is your first home that you've owned.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to pay tax on your first home that you've ever owned. And so if it's thought out more, it could be, the thing is to avoid taxing those that are really not the wealthy part of the economy. But for the wealthy part of the economy and those that are investing for speculation, I don't have a problem with implementing the tax as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I guess they were, thought about it for a long time. They would have consulted a lot of people. They rolled it out, and then, then it was all of a sudden dealing with COVID. So I'm sure, given some longer, they've got that time to think it out a little bit more and make amendments to it. And I'm all for and an advocate for first home buyers, getting into the market, and some sort of, special rules for them, definitely.
And I don't think we've seen a lot of selling based upon people trying to save capital gains tax. I mean, that's at least what so it hasn't really impacted the real estate market. I mean, December will tell if people are just trying to dump things in December. But again, in my opinion, it's not a hardship tax by any means, and the application is very generous. So I hope for the sake of the country that it's implemented next year.
Yeah. And dare I say, on a live stream, hopefully within the next few weeks, we'll be releasing a video that explains property tax, including this from end to end, that we've shot with you, that once the team and me can get back into the office, we'll finish editing and publish that onto our website for everyone to clearly understand property tax as a whole in Cambodia. This next question is always my favorite, so it's probably a great one to end on after before I ask you any final remarks from you. Between condos and old colonial flat market was the question, but flat house, which one seems safer to invest in terms of the short to middle term? But I'd love you to answer that, because that's a question from the person, but
I don't know. I'm not an expert in old colonial. I know most of these are guys that like to renovate, and the money is usually made on the renovation. They don't have a lot of value because they're pretty in bad shape when they're bought, and then the renovation, you spend a certain amount of renovation, then you make a lot of money after that. So there's been I know people have done that successfully and made a lot of money on it. But for me, if you're just buying it in in the shape it's in and expect to get a return. I can't answer that. I know the renovation of those does usually bring very positive results.
Yeah, and certainly some of those old colonial apartments, I guess, you know, their monthly rents can end up fetching sort of like some healthy sort of monthly returns for that owner as well. The I guess an extension of that question that we write about often and talk to the market about, and talk to buyers, property seekers about, is what do you think's the better, from an investment point of view? Is it a landed property in a bore, which is a gated community, or a condominium?
In terms of an investment, I think it's one is if you're living there, it's a lifestyle issue, and that's really the first and foremost. I tend to, for me, I'm a city person. I like to be right in the middle of things. I don't want to commute. I want to have convenience. I think the luxury end of that market with good location is an excellent investment. Those have really held up in terms of price and in terms of rental. Just to having the convenience and having a higher end building is great to be in the city. Families like more to have their children to have access to greenery, to have space. But for me, I would hate to have a 45-minute commute and I think those commutes can turn into worse commutes as traffic increases in the city over years. So in Jakarta is another example, which I could sort of share with you, is commutes that were 40 minutes or 50 minutes when I was there the first couple of years turned into an hour and a half commutes. So while it's good for the family, for those that are staying home, it's horrible for the working person, whether they're male or female, to come in and work in the city. So and I tend to think the land space there, the development, that really does accelerate. It does increase. There's more and more developments and more developments. So I think for me personally, I see the luxury condo market as being probably the best investment. Center city, best locations. And again, it's a lifestyle issue. I think I had to have this debate with my family. Do we want to stay and have room, for the kids, or do I want to have an hour commute every day, 2 hours, hour in and out, which I couldn't afford to do in terms of time. Yeah. So for your personal investment is one thing. I personally think in the city, best location, high end, middle to high end condos. That's where if you're going to invest, that's the place to be.
Yep. I would agree with that. We've certainly been talking about it for a long time, condo versus bore, but I was speaking to some people in my team, some locals in my team, who sort of were explaining the more affluent housing sort of journey in Cambodia. Is, they said, like, they started with a house that was probably in the city. It increased drastically in value. At that time, they saw the opportunity to probably sell that house, or at least rent it out for commercial purposes if it was a landed property in a central location. And it was definitely attractive to a Cambodian to buy a property in a bore, where there are the parks and other play facilities, swimming pools, sometimes in the bigger ones, schools and shops and cafes. And now that same person is saying to themselves, well, I've still got to go to the office every day, and my 20-minute commute is not 20 minutes anymore. It's now 40, 45, 50 minutes. So that affluent Cambodian and those that can afford it are then coming back into the city and buying sort of a second property, and more often than not a condominium that they'll keep as a second home. And then after that, look at buying sort of investment properties to lease out. So yeah, you touch on that experience yourself. It's definitely a sentiment that's coming out of my local team and a lot of the local property seekers that are inquiring about property on our website too. So that made complete sense. So we've answered all the questions, and I don't have any left for you, Anthony. really do thank you for your precious time today. It was an awesome interview, and I was looking forward to it all week, and I hope the audience got a lot out of it. But is there anything else that, that I've left out that you were hoping to touch on today?
I think you asked just closing remarks. So I'd say this. I think we shouldn't despair right now. We're probably in some of the worst times we've experienced in those that lived here, certainly for locals, in terms of having red zones and COVID cases exploding at the moment. But let's give the government a tons of credit for a fantastic job up till this point in terms of containment. And even with this spread, the numbers, although they seem much higher than the 10 or 11 we were used to every day, now 500 or 600. Those are still, in comparison to what we're seeing in India, what we saw in the U.S., and what we're seeing in Europe. These are just minimal. So the government gets a lot of credit for what they've done. The economy is very resilient. We didn't see a 20 or 30% drop, as some countries did. We're seeing 3 or 4 or 5% drop in the economy. So that's the economic policy, the safety and the health measures being done. I'm actually quite delighted to being able to live here right now, than to have the experience I might have had living in New York, where I'm originally from, during this crisis, which was quite difficult. And my fellow Americans, I felt really bad for them. And I have a lot of friends in India, which I'm feeling terrible for now. So it's not that bad. Comparatively, the government's done a great job. They continue to do a great job. We'll probably be out of this, as I said, by the fourth quarter. We're not going to see all 4 pillars of the economy recover, but one of them is sort of okay already. Agriculture is not really, it's had a marginal effect. I think in terms of the property market, that will definitely reemerge, and there'll be a surge in the next year. And the only difficulty is going to be tourism, which we'll get around to 2023. But Cambodia, fantastic investment destination. A lot of promise. It's a frontier market that's really has had a great development record the last 20 years. It will continue. We got a little bit of an issue here now. We'll get over it, and it's a great investment opportunity towards the fourth quarter. And now, I guess, when prices are low, to get in. But this is going to be the place to invest in Asia.
Yeah, I totally agree with. I loved your sort of final sentiments, and totally agree with what you're saying. And I learned a thing or two today. So thank you very much. I always love sort of interviewing you and speaking to you, and I hope our audience did too. And we will come back next Wednesday at the same time at 2:00 with different guests. And it'll be someone that's more involved in selling real estate themselves. So to get sort of more focused, hardcore focus into real estate, and where the opportunities lie, and how the market's currently coping with the situation. But Anthony Galliano, thank you very much again for your time, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Take care. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
And stay safe. Bye.